If you're looking for a powerful no-code app builder, then Softr is a great solution. But getting started with it can be quite intimidating. So in this video, I want to give you a full run-through of how to go from an idea to a fully fleshed out little internal app in Softr. By the end of the video, you know exactly how you set up your data sources in Softr, how to build the interfaces, and how to use AI and workflows to tie everything together. The specific example that we're going to use for this will be a ticketing system. So it will allow someone to submit a new ticket. It will then automatically be assigned to the right person. A product manager can review the assignment and then send it off for the engineers to work on. Ready? Let's get started. Now, before we dive into the building, let's take a second to think about what do we actually want to achieve here. We want to create a ticketing system. And basically, whenever we want to do something like this, right, we want to think in the back end, what kind of data do we need in order for this to work? And the front end, like what sort of features and interactions do people need to be able to do to use the system? And since this is a beginner video for Softr, we want to keep it very simple. In our backend, we basically need to keep track of two things. We need to keep track of the tickets and users / in this case, users, which will be either like an engineer or like a product manager. And then, of course, on the front end, what we want to do is we want so that people can report issues. Right? So that's how a new ticket is created. We want engineers to be able to go through their assigned work. And the product manager should be able to assign tickets to engineers so we know, okay, who's responsible for what. Now, first things first, we need an account. So go to the link down in the description. And Softr is very kindly sponsoring this video. So I believe you can get like a month off a paid plan with that code or the direct link. And then once you have an account, log in and we can get started with building. Once you signed up for Softr and logged into your account, this is what you'll see. And we're going to click on Start from Scratch in a second to build. But let's quickly browse also templates, because this can be a great source of either inspiration for what you want to build or really help you speed things up, right? So in our case, you might look for a ticketing system and we see there's this issue tracker, right? We can open the preview and inspect, okay, what did they do here? We have apparently our navigation on the side. We have all our issues. We have then this assigned to me Kanban, where I can move things between it. So great look, right? If you want to use this, you can do so. In our case, since this is a beginner tutorial, we're going to build everything from scratch. So you see the different features, but yeah, can be a great source of inspiration and really speed up your build. In our case, we're going to start from scratch. So let's click here. And then as the data source for this build, we're going to use the new Softr databases. Since a recent update, you can actually keep all your data and the actual application, right, in one place. So this is what we're going to use. Although you can, of course, also combine this with other data sources. I have plenty of videos, right, on how to use Notion in combination with Softr. I'll link them below. Everything from building client portals to a public roadmap. Really, really cool. But here, let's pick the Softr databases and let's think about, okay, what do we need to create our application here? Now, in our application, let's take a second to look at the UI that we have here. We see that on the side, we have navigation to jump to different parts of our app. At the very top, we see that we currently are looking at the interface options, right? Which is also why we're getting this little preview of an application here. And then we have also tabs for data and for users. Users is something we'll have a look at later, but for now, let's actually start in the data section. And as you see, the second I open this, we have here now this sort of use in this app, Softr databases, my untitled database. And then below that, we have also other data sources, right, that I've previously connected. So we see I have an Airtable connected to this and I have 2 Notion accounts connected to it. And that means, right, when you go to your data section, so you can also use specific information across your workspace actually for different apps or custom build it for this one. So that's what we're going to do. Right here is where we want to create our issue tracker. And we see we have already a user table. So this is the one that we're going to leave alone. And then we're going to change the other tables that we have here, right, for projects and clients. That's not really what we need. Instead, we want to focus here, right, on this ticketing system. First things first, let's delete the options that we have here, right? That's the easiest. I don't want projects. I don't want clients. Right click, delete. And then we can add our own table. This one will be a blank one, right? We want to create this ourselves. And we'll call this tickets. And And then it's time to set up the properties. And we see by default, it already gave me a name property, a description, and a status, which is pretty good, right? That's probably one we want also for a ticket. We want sort of like the short summary, the actual full description, and then a status for how far this ticket has progressed through our system. We also need some more information though. And the way I would always encourage you to think about databases and setting up properties on them is that you kind of, in the name of your database, right, in this very first field, that's what you're storing, like in this case, tickets. And all the other properties are information that you need to record about an individual ticket, right? Metadata. So depending on your use case, right, you have to adopt this to what you need to know in your business for a ticket of whatever other system you're building. In our case, we want to help our team prioritize. So we're going to add a field for priority, right? Which will be, as you can see, right, we have different types to choose from. This one will be a select property, right? And we'll call this priority. And then in here, right, you see we can now add different options. So we will add low, medium, and high. And for every option, right, we can then go in and change the color. So for the low one, let's actually use this light yellow, right? For medium, let's use this orange. And then for high, I like the strong red. And you have full flexibility, right? So if you want to use your own custom hex codes for these to fully adjust it, you can definitely do this. But in this case, right, we're going with these options. You can then also choose whether it should be allowed to have a multi-select, right? So this is if you wanted to add tags to something, right, and tag it by several things, you would do this. In our case, we don't want that, right? With a priority, it should always be only one. And then as a default option, we can say, okay, by default, the priority of something should be medium. This is always something, right, to think about where it's like, okay, if you have several options, what is the default for the user? Because that makes it much easier for the user than to think through, okay, is this less than normal, right? Or is it more than normal? So whatever it is, right, with select priorities, always recommend that you think, okay, what is sort of like the default and what are the escalation or de-escalation steps associated with it. So let's click on save. We have our new field. And then let's add one more in. Let's add sort of in the category. So in this case, this will be another select field, right? Let's call this category and then set up certain categories of our app that might be affected by it. So in this case, right, let's add front end. Let's add maybe, I don't know, user login might be another area that often is faulty. And then maybe, let's see what else could be. So this would depend on what kind of bugs you typically expect to happen here. So let's say we have like also like issues with sharing, right? Maybe these are the most common issues here. And of course here, right, for category or like affected feature, we might want to call it, let's actually change this, right? Affected feature. We might want to allow multi-select if a bug affects several parts, but in this case, let's also leave it as a single select without a default because we don't know what typically would be affected by the issue. Now, let's quickly check what options we have on the status property. So you can always click in there, right, on the dropdown, say edit field, and make sure, okay, what are the options here currently to do in progress done? Not bad. Now, in terms of ticketing, what I like is I like to have the first one as backlog, then this ready to start, right? Which sort of helps us to indicate, okay, like there's a lot of things that are coming in, right? Like a lot of things that we need to work on, but not all of them might be, something that are actually on our to-do list. So ready to start means we can start working on it. Then we have in progress with like the blue color, and then we will have, solved for green, and then we probably also want like an abandoned status, right, or cancelled, let's call it cancelled for red, just to indicate that sometimes, right, we won't be able to resolve something. And here as well, right, this will not be a multi-select. The default option will be backlog. That's where all tickets start, and then we can save it. Now, with our most important fields set up, we could now go in and simply fill out the data here, right? This is a fully editable database that Softr has created, and we can just input mock data, or in the age of AI, right, we don't have to do this ourselves anymore. Currently are in ChatGPT's Atlas browser. So I can simply ask it to, hey, please take over the screen here quite quickly and add some test data to this database, which means, right, it will now go ahead, read the screen and add it. And this is, I think, such a cool way to leverage technology across the board to make it easier, right, to build things. So here we see it goes ahead, right? It adds a new record, it fills it out. We have at the bottom, right, the sort of like these quick fields to fill things. And while this works in this window, we can actually go to another window, right, and keep working on it in a different browser. And you see, keeps it in sync. So we'll see the things pop up here in a moment. But basically, what we still want to do is we want to make sure that we can assign tickets to users, right? We have this other table here with our test users. So what I want to do over here is I want to add another field, and I want to add a select property with the specialty. And here, in terms of the specialties, right, I want to have kind of the same options as on the other one, right? So I think here we had, right, like front end, we had, sharing, what was it? And then what else as an issue did we have? I think we also had front end sharing and I think user login, right? So, and of course, depending on how your ticketing system is built, you can create specialties in a different way, maybe also like with a separate table, but for the simple use case, this is perfectly fine. We'll add that. And then we can now say, okay, our new user, right, will be sort of our user for the specialty front end. And then we can start relating these entries to the tickets. Right? So I can say, okay, here, let's connect our user entry to tickets. And we do this through relations, right, through a related record. So I choose this option, and let's call this assigned to. And then in terms of the related table, we click in here, right, and we say, please relate this to tickets. We want to link to multiple records, right? Someone can have multiple tickets assigned to them. Under options, we see that we could also change now the way that these are sorted in the cell. This is really cool, right? For something, for example, that's not possible in Notion very easily to sort entries in through the relation. But for now, let's just click on save and then make sure in terms of the lookup fields, right? That's sort of the next question. It asks us, do we want to add any fields from the other area? And we say, actually, no, we don't want to add anything. We just want to be able to assign it here. Now, oops, where did it go? Let's just refresh this quickly to see where our entry went. And there's our assigned to field, right? And now I could click in here and we could link it to the tickets, right? That Atlas is slowly adding in here for us on the other end. Now, in this case, right, let's assign this maybe to the feature request dark mode or the UI bug, right? No, let's do feature request dark mode. I think that's a good starting point. Back in tickets, we were maybe a bit too confident with having AI do this, right? Because of course it is adding new entries, but I wanted it to actually fill out the top 3 rows. I'm just going to delete them, right? Very easy to modify any entries in here. Let's remove them and look our main ones now. And we see we have the one, right? The feature request dark mode. Here we have now the user related. It named it automatically. I want to rename it now. I want to go in here, say edit field. Let's call this assigned engineer and save. And now from there, we could look up things, right? So for example, if we want to have in our tickets database the additional information about the user, right? We could do so. So for example, if we had things like the working hours, right, or maybe the cost of the engineer, we could show that. So in this case, right, let's just show the actual name of that person, right? So here we can go in and say either add lookup fields and say, okay, I want to have the name of that person, right, added. And now we see, okay, we have assigned engineer and we have the name, right, and then of course rename it as well, engineer. And it pulls the data from this other record, right? So if we update the assigned engineer or if we update on the engineer, the user value, it would pull in that other thing. And this is how we can start, right, putting together a simple application where data flows in and we get our tickets, we assign them to the corresponding engineer, and then we can track completion. For this beginner guide, we want to keep it simple, but just so you see, right, okay, what else is possible, we could go ahead now, of course, right, and create another table. And this could be, for example, our product features, right? So instead of using product features as a tag here, right, in terms of the affected feature, we could create it as a separate table, and then you could link to that, right? That would give you a bit more information over time. You could track, okay, how many tickets do we have per feature, and so on and so on. So if you want a way to expand this application, that would be a cool, simple way. But again, for now, let's keep it simple with these 2 tables. And then just one more thing that we want to add, and that are views, right? Whenever you have databases, you want to make the most of the possibilities of filtering and sorting. And you see that already up here, right? We have the filter and sort options. So what I want to do is I want to actually create another view for one that only shows me my high important tickets that are not completed. So let's click in here and say new view. right? Let's call this new view open and important. Let's click on save. And then here, right, what we can now do, we can say, please here, show me only things that match certain conditions. So add condition where the status is not, right, is none of either solved or cancelled, right? Those two we want to have filled out. And second condition, where priority is high, right? And now we have this new view where we only see the things that matter most, right? For really high important bugs. We could also right now change the visibility of fields. We could say, okay, do we need to see everything here? Right? Actually, I don't care so much about the name of the engineer here, right? And I know that the priority is high, so I don't need to see that either. And through that, right, I can create my custom views on the back end to do the data entry and modify it. And then we can now switch gears and move to the interface, right, and design now the application on top of this. Actually, one thing that I forgot here before we move to our front end, and that is, right, we had, of course, in our planning, right, with the ticketing system, we have two different types of users. We have the engineers who work on tickets, but we also have the product manager or product managers who should be able to assign them. So we need to make sure that in our user database, we can distinguish between them. So in this case, right, we can do so either with the specialty and just add a product manager specialty in here, or the cleaner way would be, right, to create a new select property here. Let's call this role. And our two options here would be either someone is an engineer or someone is a product manager. And the engineers will be the light purple and the product managers will be the, maybe let's do a picker, maybe light yellow for them. And then, oops, the product manager, light purple, something like this. And that way, right, we can now distinguish and say, okay, test user, that one is an engineer. And then we can create a new user, and that one will be a product manager. With the work on the backend done for now, one last thing, right, just renaming the database to the ticketing system, we can then move now to the interface. And the very first thing I want to build is a form so that external people, right, that we share that form with can enter the details. Which reminds me, actually, one thing that we probably should add here, right, is the actually sort of like who reported it. So let's the like reported by, and we'll, for the simple workflow, right, keep this as a text field. Again, in a more complex one, you could have this as a third user group, but users of a different application, and then you could link that also to their records. But in this case, we'll just have a text field to collect it. So on our front end, on the interface, this is where we can now build our app. And in Softr, we can create a bunch of pages, right? We have basically full flexibility to create as many workflows as we want. And by default, it already gives us a few together with some rules. But actually, I want to start from scratch. So let's delete whatever it is that we have here set up for now, right? Let's remove that. And then we have a blank canvas from which we can work. We'll leave the home page for now. Then I'm going to click here to add our new page. And this will be submit sort of like ticket submission, right? And then we can click on the side here, right, or on save. Now we've added this page, right? And you see we have our two pages here. I'd like to reorder them so that home is at the top and ticket submission is here. And now we can start designing this page. Designing it is always fairly simple. We can click on the plus icon here, right, to select one of the blocks from the site. And of course, what we want to add here is a form. And I want this central form because that will be our main page, right, for everyone to add whatever it is that they want us to fix. So by default, you see that my form comes here. It already has some options pre-selected, and we can now label it. So the first thing we're going to do up here is we're going to call this our submit ticket form. Next, in our settings, we need to choose the destination, right? Where should those results go to? And we want to make sure that this goes into our Softr database that we set up, right? And the ticketing system that we create, and then in the database, in the tickets database. After that, we can then go further and say, okay, what should be the submit button, right? That sounds good. We can like call this submit ticket. If we want to, we could set an icon, but for now, I like this. And then we can have a few other options. That, for example, we could say a logged in user can only submit once. We won't need this because we will not require people to log in. We will just have this live so anyone can report it. And It's fine, right? If people do it several times, we probably want to enable reCAPTCHA later in our thing potentially to make sure that we don't get any, spam. But for now, this is fine. So let's go to the next step, right? To the steps and decide what actually people can fill out here. We see in our section 1 of our form, we have first a form title. So I'm going to go in here and I'm going to update it over here, right? So submit a ticket. And then for our main text, it will be please report the issue you're encountering so the team can fix it. Perfect. This will be our basic description. And then we have already a few fields. And then whenever I click now on a field, right, for sort of the full name, we see that I can further update what we want here, right? So if we want any hidden input, right, if this should be not available, then we could do that. But for now, I like this as a short text, right? Full name will be correct. If we wanted to, we could add a tooltip or placeholder, right? Default values, but also this is pretty fine in terms of validation, right? We could now say, you need a minimum for the name, but for the name, we don't really care, right? So for the name, this is all completely fine. We can go through the other properties. So we have the email, right? That's actually a good point. We have forgotten so far to have that also in our database, but very easy, right? We simply go back to our data system, make sure we are on tickets, and then we add here an email field so that we can later store the email of the, the person who reported it. So we can contact them when things have been completed and then go back to our interface, check the other elements, right? So what else do we have there? We have the email. Yes, we have a select option. Well, for the select option, we want to actually have the options from our data source, right? So we'll go on here, the label that we'll call this priority, right? And then here we'll say, yes, please sync this with the source so that we can then choose from there what will be available. In order to sync it with the source, we actually need to select what field does this map to. And we can do so in Softr always by clicking the drop down up here, right? So I'm going to go now here, I'm going to select the priority field, and now we sync it with the source, and now our 3 options will be high, low, and medium. And in terms of the source, we're going to define it just like the way we have it there, right? So that these are our default options. We can then quickly, actually forgot this, right? Make sure that we map the name. So go to full name, map this to the name field, and then map our email field to the email property. Then, in terms of our options, we can think, is there anything else that we need from them? We want the description, right? So we are getting their name currently and their email. Then we get the priority, but we don't get the other 2 things. So let's make sure we add that in. So for the steps, we can remove the next option, but we don't need this option field, and we don't need the date and time field, but we want to add maybe even as another section, right, to like distinguish it a little bit. We want to say, okay, we want to have in here as a field an input, right, and that would be for the description. So for add the name, right, and then the description as the actual issues. And then here, what we can then do is say, okay, our name, right, so this will call what issue, what's the problem, right? And then maybe as a tooltip, we add explain in 1 sentence what problem you're having. And then for the description, we can say, okay, here that will be here, so like it can be like sort of as a placeholder text. Add any additional details for the problem line, whatever it is that you want for somebody. You see, like as you're building this out, you're getting here now your ticket form. And then once we're happy with this, we can then also define, okay, what should happen when they submit it, right? We want to show a success message and say, thank you for submitting the ticket. Someone from the team will get back to you shortly. Just a little bit of a UI statement where we can look into workflows to send actually an email with this whole thing afterwards. For now, this is good. Now, just as an FYI, so that you know what's possible, if you have a more complex demand on your forms, right? So for example, if you say there might be, I want people to be able to report bugs and feature requests. And if there's a bug, then I want the form to show this. And if they say it's a feature request, the form should say that. Well, you can do that as well in the logic tab, right? So if you go over to logic, here's where you can then say, okay, based on what happens before, right? Sort of say, okay, if the, if sort of like the one of the form answers is, from the priority is high, right? Then move them to this and that. So you have a lot of flexibility in here when it comes to building the logic, but for our simple use case, this is perfectly fine. So now it's time to test whether this actually works on the front end. And in order to do so, what we want is we want to publish this form, this whole app that we have here, this mini app, right? And that will give us, for now, this temporary domain. We can replace it with a custom domain later, but I'm happy with this one. So let's publish it and then see how it looks like on the front end. We don't need any more users, right? That we'll do later. Now, currently, when you then take this URL, right, and you put it in a new browser window to see what a guest would be seeing, right, you see we are on a login screen. We need to log in. And we haven't talked about user management yet. We'll do that in a second. But we want this form to be generally accessible for everyone. So in order to make that happen, we need to actually go to our app and then go here to the Pages option, Tickets and Admission, then click on the little settings wheel here. And then under visibility, we see that currently this is only available for login users, and we want to switch this to everyone, right? Everyone should be able to report this page. Then we save this, we publish it again. And now if we go back to our app on the front end and the correct slug, right? So and you can find the path under the settings in general, right? So / ticket submission, that's how I can find it. We go now back here, right? And we go in there and say, okay, please give me the ticket submission endpoint. We should be able to open it. And there it is. So let's test this now and enter something, right? So I am Matthias, hello at MATTHIAS-FRANK.de. I have a ticket with low priority. The problem is I can't seem to manage my tickets. Please help me resolve this, right? And then I'll submit the ticket. And then we get our little tooltip here at the bottom. Now I can go back to our data, right? To our database. And we should see now that if we move to our default view, we should have this additional ticket. And there it is. We can actually delete this entry. But there it's like, I can't seem to manage. Please help me resolve this backlog low. And it was reported, right, by Matthias. Now, I see one thing that didn't work like the reported by. I think that's probably because we mapped the fields wrong. Maybe I mapped both of them to name. So let's go back to our form and inspect this. And we see, okay, under steps, let's go to the full name property, right? Yes, we're also mapping this to name, right? It's of course not correct. That's reported by. So otherwise we have both the name and this one mapping to the same field. Then it can't work. But now that should be fixed. And if at the same time, right, we want to actually change. We don't want to change just a small tooltip, right? But we want to show something bigger. We could do that as well, right? We could swap here from on submit, show success message to show a thank you screen. And then on that screen, right, we could then say, whatever it is that we want to in this case, right? Thank you. We appreciate taking the time to complete this form and report this issue, right? Let's do it like that. Let's publish it and check the changes again on the front end. So we'll go here, right? We will refresh this once. Then I'll put this in again. Matthias, hello at MATTHIAS-FRANK.de. Priority this time is high. We need proper error handling. Does everything work now? Question mark. We will submit our ticket. Now it should refresh. Yes, perfect. So this is probably a bit better, right? It's a slightly bigger message. I like this more. And then let's go back to our system again. Check that it flows in correctly in the system now. We proper error handling. Yes, everything works now. And we see it's correctly reported by Matthias in the email. So now all our mapping works. And the form submission for the ticket is done. Which means part one of our feature flow, right? Someone can go to this form, report something, and we get the response here. That is a check. Now, once this ticket has been reported, we can start working with it. And we can do some really cool things. Of course, we ultimately want to make sure we assign it to the correct engineer. But even before that, we can now use AI and workflows in Softr to build a powerful workflow around it. For example, one thing that would be cool, right, is if the affected feature was automatically identified based on the description and the name. So in order to do this, you can click now on affected feature here in the database settings, edit field, And right, this AI agent, that's tab that we haven't looked at before. If we go now here, we can say, let AI autofill this field. And that's exactly what we want. So I'm going to click toggle this on. We can choose whether we want to be able to manually edit it or not. And in this case, we definitely want, right? If AI makes a first decision, we want to be able to modify this. We can choose the model that you want to use. And you see, depending on which ones you use, you will consume a different amount of credits. So in this case, right, like a mini model is perfectly fine. We just have a simple task here. And our prompt will be based on, and then you can use add to fill that data dynamic, right? So based on name and description. Oops, I actually need to do it differently. Based on the name and description of this ticket, please identify the affected feature. If you don't know which feature to choose, and we can see what our default should be. Right? Let's see what we have front-end sharing. Let's just add other to it in our test case, right? We might encounter a few others, but that's totally fine. Right? Choose other, and then we can say, okay, name and description, and then add in here, right? Description and add name as the values. If we wanted to, we could allow web search. In this case, it doesn't make any sense, right? But if you have sort of something where you say, okay, someone filled something out, we want to research who they are. For example, maybe you get the email. Well, maybe this is instead of a ticketing system, like a lead form, right? And you want to look up the company that they're working for to see whether that's an interesting lead. Then you could do that, right, to enrich data, right, when it gets, filled out. And then we can say run when. And you see here, we can trigger this manually always. And then, of course, we want to basically say when a new record is created. That's what we want to trigger. We could say also on update, but in this case, we just want to have it run once when these values are filled out. Otherwise, we could create additional conditions to say, okay, only run if something is not filled. So for example, right, we could expose the affected feature on the form, right? And say, hey, user, if you know which feature this belongs to, you can fill it out, but you don't have to, right? We can make optional and mandatory fields. And then in this case, we could say, okay, if it's empty, only then run. But in our case, we want to always run it when this is the case. We could preview it right now to see, okay, like what happens here. But in this case, we can actually just click on save. And then we now have this little AI button here. And you see that I have this option to fill with AI. So I can click now here on this can't seem to manage my tickets. And we'll have it run in the background and see what it comes up with for this one. And then whenever a new ticket is submitted, right, it will automatically fill that out. And by the way, that is front end is what it chose, right? Based on these elements, right? Can't seem to manage my tickets. Yes, that's an issue with the interface. Of course, you can extend now your prompt, right? You could make it more prescriptive and say, okay, if this, then that, and you can have a lot of flexibility. But in this case, this is a good starting point. Next, let's take this one step further with workflows. In this case, in order to create one of our workflows, we should first actually give our application a name here, right? So let's click up here and let's call this our ticketing system Softr beginner guide. And then once we're done here, let's just quickly make sure we have the class version published. And then we're going to go back to our home, to dashboard. And here you see we have this new section called workflows, right? We can also from here sort of like access all our apps. We can manage our databases, right? Because they can be used across different apps and our workflows. And here we can now create routes to say whenever something happens, make something else happen. And that's exactly what we want to do here. So let's create our first workflow. And our trigger in this case will be something in our Softr database, right? Something happens in the database, then we want to work with it. In this case, the trigger will be that a record has been added, right? When a new form, a new ticket is submitted, then something should happen. So this is what we'll choose as our trigger. And then here you see this, if you work with any, sort of like relay, make, Zapier, right? You'll be familiar with this general workflow build-out. Even if not, it's super simple to follow. Basically, we now can just define what should happen if a record is added. First, of course, we need to choose where is it added, but let me zoom in a little bit. We're saying, okay, if a record has been added to the ticketing system, our tickets database, that's when we want to run this. Then we can click on continue and we can, of course, test it, right? So like see, does something come in? Yeah, these are the values, right, that come in from a typical entry. And then we can go to the next action. And we can say, okay, when this happens, what should we do? The first thing that we want to do, right, so remember, we want to send an email. We want to notify the user, right, or send them like in any ticketing system, we received this, someone will be working on it shortly. So let's choose send email. And then we see, right, we have this testing email. We need to, of course, send a custom email for the production, but for this purpose, it's great. And we will send the emails always to hello@MATTHIAS-FRANK.de in our real workflow, right? We would actually do this. Let's do this real. Like we do add, right? And then we can choose from our added record the email that was put in there, right? So this is what we send it into. And then we say, we received your ticket. And then we can say, hey, and then sort of like add, right? And we can, again, input the name of the user, and so we can browse through these things. We can also search, right, for the name. No, is it the submitted by, right? I think we had it called. What was the label for that? Yeah, here, reported by. That will be, hey, reported by. Thanks a lot for submitting your ticket. Someone will get back to you shortly. For your records, here's what you reported, right? And then we can say ticket name and sort of ticket description, and then input that data and say, okay, ticket name, right? That will be from the record the name, and then we have the ticket description that will be at descriptions from the record added, right? The description. Perfect. We could also choose BCC, right, or CC, but this is perfectly fine. We can, if we want to format this further, right, we can actually add HTML here, right? So if you want to create a full HTML email with styling and all, you can do that, but we keep it plain and simple for now. So let's keep it at that. And let's just go again to testing, right? And we do a mock test and send this and see, okay, like what would have been sent. And we can see, okay, this seems to have gone through properly. If we want to make sure that we actually send an email, we would go to real test, right? We say test again, and now it will send me an email. I will check in a second in my inbox where that also came through. And this is what landed in my inbox. Pretty good, right? Has all the information, but of course, it could look nicer. Luckily, creating an HTML email has never been easier than in the age of AI. So I'm just going to take now this content, then go over to Claude, ChatGPT, right, your tool of choice, and ask it to create a simple yet well-styled HTML email. And you can go as fanciful or as low as you want, right? You need to be a bit careful with HTML emails. Not all providers, right, will render them the same way. So you want to err on the side of minimalism, and before you roll this out, to a client, make sure that you test with different devices, right? How does it look on mobile? How does it look when I receive this on Outlook versus Gmail versus Apple? But other than that, right, it's a great way to create these well-formatted documents. And Softr can take it, right? So it can work then with this as a baseline. So we'll have it create this and then put it into the system and then test it again. So back in Softr, I'm going to replace now my email body, right? I'm going to open this up a little bit larger. I'm going to replace this with the HTML email, which of course means we need to figure out, okay, where in this HTML email do we need to map now our values? So let's have a look at it, right? This is the head, this is the above part. So content, right, this is where it starts. And you can, of course, always ask, ChatGPT to help you here. So we hey, and then here, that's where we want to put in the person who submitted it, right, reported by, even though it was empty. And then for the ticket details, right, ticket name, perfect. That will be the, where it says, I can't seem to manage my tickets, right? We need to replace this with a dynamic value of the ticket, and then ticket description. Also this needs to be replaced. Oh no, so like this here, please help me, right? Needs to be replaced by the dynamic value. And then that should be good, right? And then we can click out of this and we can again set it a new test with this. And here's the result, right? And that already looks pretty nice, but of course, not the biggest fan of that color. I would probably change that, but you see how quickly you can go from some very plain text to a really cool looking email with a little bit of help of AI, and then send it out fully automated, right, with Softr's workflows. So we have the send email set. That's perfect. And at this point, let's quickly rename this, right? Let's name this from new untitled workflow to new ticket submission, because that's exactly what we want, right? We need to modify that person once they receive it. Next, we want to enable our product manager to do something with this, right? So we probably want to also notify them. We might want to actually just create another email step to email our internal product manager. And then we can see whether we can also make their life a little bit easier. So let's see whether it's possible for us to connect, already preliminary, a specific ticket with the record, with the person who should work on it. So that the product manager only needs to do a check whether everything was correct, right, based on the AI labeling. So let's click on plus, and let's make sure we wait just briefly here, right, because the system, of course, internally needs to run for a moment. So let's say we want to actually just wait for 2 minutes while AI fills out the values. And then we can say, okay, after that, I want you to do something with our elements, right? I want you to go to the Softr database. I want you to look up the value again and see what AI has now filled in. So we say find record, and we want to find it in the tickets database, right? The record where the where the name is the one from before, right? So we can put in the record added. Can we actually can't search by the ID here yet, but we can say, okay, where that equals the name of our record entered. Where are we with our name here? This one, perfect. And then again, right, we can just test it, see, does it run properly? Yes, that looks good. And then we can say, okay, as a next action, I want to now connect it. I want to now see in my Softr database, right, I want to find, okay, who is the engineer that works on this type of problem? So we want to find another record, right? And we can actually make sure to make it a bit easier. We can rename these steps. So we can say instead of find record here, we will get updated ticket, right? And here, this find record step will be find matching engineer. So here we say, okay, database is again ticketing system, but this time we want to look up users, and we want to look up the user where the specialty is any of, right? We might have several specialties, and then we can choose from our variables and say where that matches from get updated ticket, where is it? We should have our here affected feature label frontend, right? Where any of these are the matching levels. And again, we could go in, right, and test it. Does it find something? Yes, it finds our test user, right? Because he is also frontend, and that's the same as for our ticket. And last but not least, we can update it, and we can say, okay, let's preliminary connect these two. So again, new action, Softr database. Let's update a record, right? We only need to update a single record. And we need to say, okay, which one do we want to update? We want to update our ticket. Let's rename again our step. Assign ticket to the engineer and say database, ticketing system, ticket. We want to update it based on the record ID from a previous step. Yes, we want to update the one that we either one, right? Both of them should be the same. Record added, that ID. And we want to make sure that when it comes to assigned engineer, that we want to modify, and we want to say, okay, assigned engineer will be find matching engineer ID. That's what we can do to automatically make it run together. And so one last thing, we want to make sure that when we search for this ticket, we update our search, not just that we match the name, but also as a second thing, right, that the engineer here is empty, which means we only, if something on the off chance, right, that some things get reported with exactly the same name, that we don't reassign the wrong one. We want to say assigned engineer is empty. And that way, right, we can be sure that we always just grab the latest. And we can turn this on, and then we can submit a new ticket and see whether the whole flow works. So back at our form, let's say Matthias reports another issue. Hello at Matthias-FRANK.de. Priority is medium. Let's make another front-end problem, right? The dark mode button is bugged. When I click it, it doesn't switch to dark mode. And then let's submit this ticket. And a few things should happen, right? In our system, dark mode button comes in. When I click it, it doesn't switch to dark mode. That's a problem. AI has run, right, and assigned just to the front end. And now in a moment, after 2 minutes of the delay, right, our workflow here should run and assign the correct engineer to this topic. In the meantime, we will also get an email, probably, as the user who reported it. And then we can also check in our logs, right? So if we go out of here and go to the workflow, we should now be able to see in here in our runs history that there is something that is currently working, right? Something is happening with it. And we see, okay, 2 steps have been executed so far, and it's currently on the wait step. So we can kind of follow along as this automation runs. Maybe 2 minutes was a bit long while we saw the AI works quicker, but still, I think it's good when you have these AI steps and you don't quite know how long they will take to have a little bit of buffer. So I think we waited long enough. So let's refresh our workflow triggers, go back to the runs and see, yes, so according to the workflow triggers, it ran correctly. And now let's check our database, ticketing system, tickets, and see, yes, it assigned the correct engineer preliminary to this, right? Which is amazing. That means someone can now submit a ticket, AI automatically labels it, and our product manager gets a suggestion of who should work on this based on the ticket content. Which means we now need to create a way for the product manager to actually see, was that right? Or do we need to make any changes? In order to do that, let's go back to our app. So go to dashboard, apps, and then back to our ticketing system. And let's make sure we add a new page here now, right? So far we have our home page. We can think about what we will utilize that one for, but I want to add a new page. And this one will be sort of the product manager overview. And this will just be, I'll just call this as a slug manage. And then we can click on save. Now here, I want to make sure that the product manager can see all the, sorry for that, all the tickets that have come in. We can do that with a dynamic block, right? So in Softr, we can use on the front now these blocks to display the data from our database so they don't have to work on the database itself. In order to do so, let's just go in here, right, and say, okay, I want to have a dynamic block. I want to have this list element. That's the one that I want to pull things in. Or actually, maybe I want to pull things in as a table. Now that I think about it, I think table makes more sense because we want to have all the details in here. And then what we can say is, okay, what should be displayed? We want to say, yes, from the Softr database, our data source, the ticketing system, the tickets. That's what I want to pull in here, right? We see, okay, we have already the name, the description, the status. That's great. But there are a bunch of fields that actually don't match yet. So 2 things we need to do. First, we need to make sure that only certain entries are shown, right? Because I don't want to show all the tickets. I only want to show the tickets that should be, assigned to the correct property engineer to double check. And then we need to update the content that gets shown here. Let's set the condition first. We can do this here in this conditional filter section. And we can say now, okay, add a condition. And I want to show this only if a ticket is in the backlog stage. Because that would be logic, right, for this little app that I thought up here is the ticket comes in, we have the preliminary assignment to an engineer from the AI, and then we want to, when the product manager reviewed it and said, yes, now you can start working on it, right? I think this is an important bug to work on, then it should disappear from here and appear on the engineer's field. So we want to say, select a field if the status, right, of the ticket includes backlog, then please show this here, right? And only if that is the case. If not, don't show anything. And then for the sort, we could add a sort by one of the fields, right? We actually don't have a created date, just realizing, but no problem. Let's just go to data, right? Make sure we're on tickets, add a new field in here, and we can add sort of as a system field the created at property, right? Created at, that will be the time. We can convert it if we want to, right? But otherwise all this is fine. And now when we go back to our interface, we can now say, okay, for my sorting, I want to sort this based on the created at time, right? And I want to show the newest at the top. So we have this kind of ongoing rolling sequence. And we see now, right, it only shows me on backlog items, UI bug at the very top. Now let's move on to the content tab. And here, make sure that we sort of show only the relevant fields. We could, of course, also add a title, right? We could say something like, okay, tickets to process, and do some instructions. Here are all the tickets currently waiting to be started. And we can choose what we want to show here. Name and description, we definitely want that. Status, yes as well. URL is not a property that we have, so we can delete this. It's not relevant. We can choose whether the email matters from the person who reported, but I don't think it does for the product manager in this case, right? They don't really need to see this. We only need to see the priority here, so that's pretty good. We could then, if we wanted to, right, say, okay, should there be a search bar, right? We have it currently on. I quite like it, right? Ability to search, and we can define what fields in the Softr database actually are searched through. So reported by again should not be searched through because that is nothing that the person will usually filter by. So name, description, and then maybe the one thing that we should show is probably the feature, right? So let's add that back in. Let's say here, we want to show the affected feature. That is very relevant for making that decision. And then that is something that I also want to filter by here when we search. We can also allow filters here, right? We currently have name filters, filtering by name and description. These are actually, I don't think, relevant filters because, this is more like a search tree that's very open-ended what can be in there. But a filter that I want to have in there is the affected feature. So that's what we're going to add in. Affected feature, filter by affected feature, right? We want to sync it with the source. The sort is custom, it's fine. And then we can choose, right, like how that should be displayed, whether they can have multiple features there or not. I think, yes, they should be able to do that. And I like a dropdown as an option. Alternatively, you could have it also as tags, right? That they could click on that. I think dropdown makes more sense in this case. So this is what I want to save it as. Now, let's go next, right? In terms of actions, one thing I want to do is I want to remove this end record because the product manager will not report tickets themselves. So going to the actions tab, right? We can now go in here and say, well, let's remove this. Remove the add record button. And that makes it a bit cleaner. But what I want them to be able to do is I want them to be able to update individual items. Right? They should be able to change the state from an entry to then ready to work or cancel. Right? Maybe they say, actually, this ticket is not relevant. Let's not work on it. Or let's go through it. So we do this with an item button. And we will say, okay, when this happens, we want them to be able to edit the record. Right? So we have a bunch of options, as you can see, right? We could open something. We could open this record, right? If there was additional details that they would need to see. But for this case, all we want is the option to edit the record. And we can say, okay, yes, allow them to edit. And then we can choose what the modal shows, right? So there will be a little pop-up, and then they can say, okay, what happens when they do this? So we will say, okay, they will be allowed to edit which field, the status. That's something that they can edit, and the assigned engineer, right? Because they can say actually a different engineer should be the one who's responsible for this. It's like, update ticket, and then, say update and cancel, that's fine. And we can, the success message can be, you updated the ticket, ! Perfect. So let's see how this now looks on the front end for the flow for someone who would be an engineer, a product manager. Now, in order to properly test this on the front end, we need to first add a user that is a product manager, right? We currently only have, if we go to our users tab or in our users data, right, we have only this one test user who is an engineer based on their role. We want to change this. Now, in order to do user management in Softr, we should first zoom out a little bit and talk about what does it actually mean. Users for your app are the people that can log in and then do certain actions. And in Softr, you can restrict the pages that they can see, right, and the actions that they can take, which means you can model your app. In our simple flow, right, we sort of have three groups of quote-unquote users. We have the non-users, right, people who can just submit a ticket, and we've made this public on the web, right, so you don't need to log in order to submit a form. If you wanted to, of course, you could expand this, right, and could also say, well, also people that want to submit a ticket need to be logged in as sort of like a different state. But here, to keep it simple, everyone will be able to submit a ticket. But then in order to work with the tickets, you of course need to log in. And you need to either be one of the engineers who works on their tickets, or you are the product manager who can see everything and assign tickets. The way that you can log in is determined by going to users and then authentication. And you see by default, our default authentication is email and password, which is also what I would recommend for your flows, right? That means every user gets a password method, and you have a very simple way of doing that. If you want, you can also enable this one-time code thing, right, where you send them, when they input their email, a code to the email, and then they can put it in option 1. Another option is this magic link, right? If you turn that on, you'll get first this pop-up. It's of course not as secure, but basically then with that link, right, the user can immediately sign in without having to enter their email and password combination. These two will be your most common flows, right? On Enterprise, you can of course also enable single sign-on, or you can enable Google sign-in. But for now, let's leave it as the email one. You can then choose whether people can sign up, right? So if you have an app and you want people to, create their own accounts, you could do that. But for us, we leave it as disabled. We don't have a specific onboarding flow, right? But you could create an explanation of what happens when someone first logs in, and then we can sort of set the cookies, right, for like how long someone will stay logged in. So this is pretty good now, right? But it's important to review these settings once. Then let's go back to our users and look, we have our test user, right? We have the created time. We see that it is synced, right, with the users table in the database. We could add them to groups. We'll talk about that in a moment. We see how it was created. We see the auth method, right? And we see that there's no specific onboarding here. So now what we can do is we can add another user, right? We can say, okay, this will be sort of like our product manager, right? We'll, sorry, we need to add a email here. I bet. Say like, hello at MATTHIAS-FRANK.de. Name is product manager. And then we can assign them to a user group. We currently don't have one, right? So we just add this user for now. Then we'll see that we'll send them an invite, right? Which allows them to set the password once that's the case, right? We'll just send this as an email. I'll go through that in a second to create my account. And now what we want to do is we want to make sure that this main user, right, is product manager, and the other one is the test user. So let's go to user groups and say under user groups, right, we want to create a new type of a logged in user. We want to say one user group will be our product managers. And then you can see we can either assign them manually or condition based. And we want to do conditions, right? We want to like have all of these things run automated. So we want to say, okay, if the role that is, right, if that is product manager, then we want to add them to that group. Save. And then the same way, right, we will add another custom group. We will say, okay, this will be our engineers, right? Also assign condition based. If the role is engineer, then add them to this group and save. And now we can simply go to our data tab, right, and make sure that for our second user, we assign the role of product manager. And now they will automatically be in that group, which means our users, right, are now automatically assigned to their groups. That works perfectly. We can see, right, if we had manual assignment, right, we could do it through that, but they will be automatically added to them without us having to do anything. And now all we need to do is make sure that on our app, we say, well, this page, right, that we have, that can be seen only by product managers. To do so, let's go back to our interface. And then on the page, right, we are on our ticketing page. Let's move to home again above. Product manager overview. Let's go on the settings. And we looked at there before, right, when we published the other one for everyone. Under visibility, we want to make sure now, login users, but only specific login users, because only product managers should be able to see this. And we can click on save, then we can click on publish, and then we can go now to the front end, log in as, you know, the newly created user that I have, and then see whether the flow works. So now in my application, right, I'm logged in. I can see the different entries, and then I can go on every entry where I can say, okay, let's edit this. Let's change the backlog status to, ready to start. We need to change the sorting here. Assigned engineer, that is fine, right? And let's update it, and perfect. It works, right? As soon as I edit an record here, it disappears from the process. I can say, okay, this one should be ready to start. I can assign the engineer if he's not assigned yet, right? Update it, and so on, and make sure that with a few clicks, we have everyone assigned, and the tickets can then pop up on the next part, right, which we're going to build now. On the engineer dashboard, it shows tickets only assigned to them and allows them to move them through the statuses of work. For that, let's actually repurpose our homepage, right? In this simple one, we won't need a separate one, so let's go in here. We can then actually, like on the top right, it says welcome logged in user. We don't really need that, so I'm going to delete that section. And then what we want is also like remove this one. We want to show the individual engineers their parts, right? So here I'm going to search for the Kanban board, right? I really love this new feature. It's currently in beta. And this allows me now to say again, right? Tickets, yes, ticketing system from the tickets entry. And here we will set now a conditional filter, same idea as before, but I want to see only the entries that are ready to work and that, are assigned to me. So add condition where the status of the ticket you can just say includes none of, right? It should not be in the backlog. And once it's solved or canceled, right, we also want it to disappear. So these should not be there. And then we want another condition right, where the assigned engineer, right, that should be, then we can say logged in user, right? If the logged in user, if that's the same one that is looking at it, then it should be shown, otherwise don't show it. Next, let's quickly adjust in terms of the content type, right? We can actually like show or hide a subtitle. In this case, let's just keep it very minimal and just keep the tickets. In terms of the grouping, right, we will say let's group this by status. And now we see it syncs with our source, right, of the options that are there. We can either say them to show all of them, or we can hide some, and that's what we want, right? We don't want to show backlog because they will never see it. Ready to start in progress, right? That is then fine. Cancelled, they can also see, right, in case the engineer would ever have to cancel something, although like no, they should solve everything, right? So let's show these three, even though solve will always be empty because we filled it out. We want them to be able to drag it in there, right? So that it properly gets processed and they can set it to done if they want to. We can then, for the items, right, modify the values that are in here. So far it's the name and the description, that's fine. We don't really need the status, right? So we can remove that as an entry. If we want to, we could add the priority back in, right, if that was relevant. We actually probably also might want to have the description up here. So let's see, let's take add a divider and like add as a field the description and the priority. I think this is overall the nicer way, right, of displaying this, and then we can remove the footer. We don't really need any data in here. It's just a better way to display this, right? And that's pretty nice. Column styles, standard is good, right? If you wanted it to change to a more minimal one, you could do that, but I like these different typical Kanban boards. I want a search bar at the top, right? If you want to filter for something, we could do this again, right? So if you say, okay, the engineer wants to filter by something, maybe they want to filter by priority, right? So let's add that in, make sure we have neither name or description, right? Those we can delete, but we can then add back in the filter for priority, right? That might be a useful one. Let's add priority in there, and then they can pre-filter themselves for that. And yeah, that looks pretty good. Last but not least, we want to make sure that the sort of add record button, right, is also disappearing here, because there's no point for them to add new tickets to their plate. So let's go to the action button, drag and drop. Yes, that should be enabled, right, for Kanban, but we don't need the add feature. We can turn that off, right? So this is the one that shows here on the individual ones. We collapse columns. No, they should always be open. So that's another action we want to remove. And then the top button, right? We want to remove that as well to have just this clean Kanban element, right, for them to do something. Now, if we wanted to, we could allow them to click on records, right? For example, to open the details of that, but we don't really need to do it for this simple ticketing system, right? If you wanted to build something more advanced, you could do it. You could say, okay, yes, let's open a details page. That would mean creating one, right? We don't have one yet, so we would go here, create a details page for tickets. Works exactly the same way, while we have our drag and drop builder, we can pull in the content then from an individual ticket to do that. But for here, that's fine. So we will say do nothing and then publish and test again. By the way, for that, right, we probably also want to make sure that on the page, we go to the settings and say, okay, first, right, what should be the slug? Yeah, the general one, that's fine. And then we want to make sure that in terms of visibility, this one is visible to our user group, the engineers. And just for testing purposes, I will quickly add my one test user that I have to both groups to make it a little bit easier, then publish, and then we can test the flow on the front end. All right, so now we are back in the front end, right? I'm on my homepage. Currently, I don't see any tickets because just realized I didn't assign any to that user. So let's fix this. Let's go to data, right? Tickets. Let's make sure that some of the ones that are ready to start, right? Let's swap the user from the test user actually to the other one, right? Let's make sure this is the case. We can remove the test user here, right? Let's also maybe for another one that is ready to start right here as well. It is the wrong one, right? But again, just for testing purposes. And now we can go back here, refresh this, and now I should see 2 tickets here. Yes, perfect. I can move them to next one, right? In progress, and I can check here, update to in progress, perfect. And now this one, dark mode button is bugged, right? Let's move this to solved. And then we can see a second here, it goes also into solved. So we have our basic flow, right? Others, right, can submit a ticket. It gets with the AI categorized. We get a notification out to them, and the workflow automatically assigns them to the engineer that probably should work on this. The product manager can review it on their little dashboard, and then once the product manager moves it to ready to start, I, as an engineer on my homepage, will see them. I can move them around, right? And then, of course, we could now build another workflow Same principle that says, okay, when a record, right, goes into the solved column, right, then send an email to the person reported and tell them, well, we fixed it, right? Same principles. And through that, you can now expand the functionality of your app. For now, let's actually focus on sort of like the last finishing touches to make this ready for publication. One of the things we need to fix is the navigation, right? Even for a simple application like this one, currently we have a lot of broken ones, right? We have this weird form that doesn't point anywhere, the projects. So how do we fix that? Well, if you go to our interface editor and then select any page, and if we click on the settings wheel and navigation, we see that currently we have navigation 1 here selected, right? This is the one that we have. We could also go to none. But if we have navigation 1, right, we see that here in the sidebar that pops up. And now if we click on there, we can modify it, right? We can first give it a name if we wanted to, right? This could be like our main nav. We want to definitely use the site layout. And then here we can now show what should show up there, right? Home, that's fine, but we actually need to rename this to engineering Kanban, right? And the other option that we want to show here would be, right, currently this is a folder, right? Actually, we don't need that, but we can remove it. We can also remove the form. And then we can say, okay, let's add back in, like the page, right? That would be our product manager overview, right? We can call this manage tickets if you're an engineer, someone there. And then last but not least, if we wanted to have the ticket submission form open, right, if it ever is relevant, right, we can have that there as well. And now these things show in the sidebar. We can, of course, change the icons if we wanted to, right? Let's swap that out maybe for this one. And for ticket submission, let's change that to something like a form, right? Or like a, let's give it a tray. No, okay, let's just pick like one of the popular options, maybe the email, right? That is a nice one. And then we can save that. And then our new form will show this as the login menu on the site. With our main user flows ready and the navigation fixed, it's pretty much now time to put on the finishing touches on this app, right? And then start using it. As always, right, you have 2 areas where you find the settings, and we touched upon them a few times already, but I just want to like highlight them again. Under pages, right, you can pull up always the settings for a specific page and could say, okay, you know, under general, let's change the name, right, or the slug. That will be the main one that we'll use. Navigation, usually you don't need like several navigation, different ones, right, for one and the same app, but you could do that here. And then under custom code is where you can inject your own CSS if you want to do very specific styling. But other than that, right, SEO, footer, social, those are not too relevant if you build an internal app like this one. Then you can also, of course, find your general settings here, where you might want to update the icon, right? I renamed it already to ticket tracker. You can upload your own icon if you wanted to. This is the one that will show them, you know, in the browser there. Then as well, custom domain, if you want to connect something, right, probably better than the default one. You have a few special options, right? SEO again, probably not too relevant for you. And then custom code, if you want to inject it on that level, quite useful, right? Again, if you want to add some personalized styling, but goes a little bit beyond beginner tutorial. I do have one though where we use custom styling, so I'll link to that down in the description. For now, let's look at the last option that we haven't talked about yet, and that's the theme. Of course, right, we can change the branding of the whole app to suit whatever it is that we prefer. Besides going into the CSS, right, we can always say, okay, what should be our general heading, right? I do like inter as the default. That is quite nice with the same body. We can change our colors, right? So if our accent color, right, if you want something else there, right, for example, like, you know, a dark color, right? So sort of like this one here, maybe, then we can update it. We can change the roundness, right, of the general icons. These are sort of like a general presets that we can modify. And then if we are, you know, a bit more specific with them, then we would use that with the CSS. But you see, like, changing them just light blue already changed this navigation bar here on the side. And then if we have any of the buttons for actions, that would be updated accordingly, right? So for example, if we look at our ticket submission form quickly, we see we now also have this dark blue here. And there you have it. A simple yet powerful app to start tracking your tickets via Softr. It is a really powerful piece of software, and it's only gotten better with the recent introduction of its own databases, AI actions, and workflows. I can't wait to see where this goes next, so big thank you again to Softr for sponsoring this video. And if you have now some more questions on what to do next, well, first, leave them down below in the comments, and then check out this video, where again we look at the combination of Softr with Notion to build a really powerful client portal system. Just click here and I will see you in a few seconds.